Today we're going to be taking a popular YouTube tag, making it more booky. So some of you may have heard of the My First Time tag, but this is going to be the book versions with questions such as, what was the first book you recall reading? What was the first book of insert genre here? Those are just some of the questions that we are going to answer. Yeah. So there are 11 questions that I've made up for this tag that I've written down because I needed to, because I'm forgetful. So, the first book you recall reading. This is going to be specifically a proper book, not like a child's book that's under 100 pages. Because a lot of children's books are really, really short. So we're going to go with like a first proper book. And the book that I first remember reading is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Sorcerer's Stone if you're in America. But yes, Philosopher's Stone. This came out in 1999. I feel like I bought it around then. Well, I didn't buy it, but I feel like I read it around then. I was only like 4 or 5 when this came out, but I remember reading it when I was young. So it's probably very odd of me to be reading this at such a young age, but I read it at a very young age. So yes, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is the first book I recall reading. So the next one is the first book you remember buying for yourself. So you didn't get your parents to buy it for you, you bought it with your own money. Or in my case, a gift card, because gift cards are popular. And I think this one is the first book I remember buying, which is Percy Jackson and the Titan's Curse. I bought it quite a few years ago now, but I remember buying it personally. I think all the books before this, my mum had bought. My mum had bought me hundreds of books, well not hundreds, but a fair few. But this is the first one that I remember paying for with a voucher. I ordered it in with a voucher because they didn't have it in stock. And yeah, Percy Jackson and the Titan's Curse. I think. It's quite a tough one to remember, but yes, first book I remember buying. Okay, this is the interesting one. First book you couldn't finish. And this one for me is really embarrassing, because the first book I couldn't finish was Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. And it wasn't because it was a bad book, it was because when I first started reading this, it scared me. The beginning bit, when Electo jumps down at Percy, that gave me a nightmare, and I just put the book down and couldn't finish it for ages. But eventually, like a couple of years later, I picked it up and read it again, because it's not like I was that young when this book came out. God. I was just a pathetic child that couldn't read the beginning of this book for quite a few years. And then I read it and I loved it, and it's a great idea. But yes, the first book I didn't actually finish on the first time through. Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. So, the next one. The first complete series, from start to finish, you remember reading. And this is the Saga of Darren Shan. I finished reading this, I read all of this in year 5, so I was about 9 when I read this series, and I read all of them. I borrowed them all and read them all. And then I bought them all later on for myself so I could reread them. But yes, that is the Darren Shan series, it's made of Set to Free, the Vampire Assistant, Tunnels of Blood, in the binder Vampire Blood. Vampire Rights, which is made out of Vampire Mountain, Trials of the Death, and then Vampire Prince, Trials of Death, or Trials of the Death. And then I have Vampire Mountain again, but yeah. And then the next bind-up is Vampire War, but I don't have that bind-up. I have Hunters of the Dusk, Allies of the Night, Killers of the Dawn. And then the last one is Vampire Destiny, made up out of, if I remember, Lake of Souls, Lord of the Shadows, and then Sons of Destiny. So yes, that's the first series I remember reading from start to finish. Okay, next one is first fantasy book that you remember reading. It's always you remember. But obviously, the first book I remember reading was Harry Potter. This is also the first fantasy book I ever read. So, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone takes the cake on that one again. Next one is first contemporary novel, which is very specific, because as someone who doesn't read a lot of contemporary, the only contemporary book, well, I've read 2 contemporary books really, and the first one I read was The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. That's the, contemporary, not historical, because I technically read Goodnight Mr. Tom, but that's more historical 1940s World War II fiction, and this is the first actual, modern day book I've read, Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which is amazing, and everyone should read it, because such an insight into an autistic mind, and it's just so good. So yes, this is the first contemporary book. It's in contemporary, I'll reiterate that. Contemporary, modern day, not slightly contemporary but really historical. So I could do first historical, but I don't own a copy of Goodnight Mr. Tom, so I'm not going to. So instead we can do the first dystopian novel. And I haven't read, I feel like I thought I read a lot of dystopian, but in reality the first one is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I literally bought the box set 2 months before the first film came out, because the first film came out in March 2012, and I bought it in the January, and then I read it that day. It took me, I think, a day and a half to finish. The Hunger Games, though, is the first real dystopian I read. So yes, The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. So the next one is the first graphic novel you've ever read, and I thought this one was a little bit different. But I've actually only read one graphic novel, but I want to get a few more. I've got 4 graphic novels on my wish list, but the graphic novel I've read is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, with illustrations by David Wenzel, and it was adapted by Charles Dixon. But yes, this is the graphic novel of The Hobbit. This is the graphic novel of The Hobbit, and I used to read this loads just because it was so easy to read, and the illustrations are really pretty. See, this is Gollum, and it looks really cool. So this is the first graphic novel I read, and it's the only one I've read, but I am going to change that. So coming down to the last 3. The first is Your First Book Ship, which I'm torn between because there's 2, but I don't remember the times, because I'm tempted to say Harmony, which is Harry and Hermione, because when I was really in lower school, me and the girl I liked in lower school, because we were 6-year-olds, we would as a group play Harry Potter, and I'd be Harry and she'd be Hermione, and I'd be so happy with this. But also Darren and Debbie from the Saga of Darren Shan. That was year 5 though, so technically Harmony, but I don't really recall what time period this was, so we're going to go with Harmony though. Okay, Harmony. And then the first spin-off book you've read. This was a little bit different, a little bit harder, because I think I've only read 3 spin-off series, which would be The Infernal Devices, Heroes of Olympus, and the Saga of Lawton Crepsley. And I think Lost Hero came out just before the first book of the Saga of Lawton Crepsley. So technically this is the first spin-off I read, which was 2010, so that's quite 4 years ago. But yes, first spin-off, Lost Hero. Woo! Loved it. Great book. All of them great. Let's not talk about Percy Jackson though. I'll be here forever. And the last one is the first book you read because of BookTube. And this was The City of Bones, which I tried to read it, couldn't get into it after I watched the film, and then I saw a few booktubers talking about it, and the last one was coming out, so I was like, I have it, I'll give it a go again. I gave it a go again, I loved it, brought the rest of the series, marathon the whole series, marathon the Infernal Devices. It was a really good decision in the end, but yes, this was really because of BookTube I picked this book up again to really finish it. And I'm glad I did in the end, because Cassandra Clare is now one of my favourite authors, so that's what 10 books by her does to you. So yes, that is the first time book edition tag thing. I would tag, but I don't have any friends on BookTube, so I could go with the really bold tags and tag big people, big booktubers, but I'm not going to do that. Or I could. Let's do it. I tag Christine, I tag Jessie, I tag Kat. That's 3 really huge booktubers that I'm just going to be a real knob to. But yeah, Christine, Jessie, Kat, that's Katie Tastic, Poem Blonde's books, Jessie the Reader, and possibly Vincent Van Stop, Katie from her as well, yeah. Oh no, I'm Reagan, Peruse Project, she can do that. I'm a knob, goodbye.